Chapter 2, Don't Call Me a Gambler. Gambler card counting concepts. I come from a religious background. As my interest in blackjack moved from conceptual to real, I felt I needed to address all sorts of issues before I'd consider actually trying it. Here are some of the questions I asked myself and the answers that eventually satisfied my moral concerns. Is it illegal? It is perfectly legal to use your brain. It may not be popular in casinos, but thinking is still legal even if it involves watching the cards closely, keeping the running count and converting to the true count, and sizing your bets accordingly, all at lightning speed, while appearing indifferent to it all. Is money evil? The Bible says, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Being a cheap and ambitious 22-year-old, loving money too much was definitely not my problem. I also didn't particularly love waiting tables at Red Robin. Is it wrong to be in a casino? It's pretty unwise if you've got a gambling problem. But I didn't believe I did. Ironically, I was gambling that I didn't. Ultimately, I won that bet. Is gambling wrong? The Bible doesn't specifically address this, but the common thought among the Christians I knew was that gambling is definitely wrong. The problem was that, the more you try to research this question in religious circles, gambling is never clearly defined. People in both the Old and New Testaments cast lots of the old school way of throwing dice to select someone from a group of people or to make a difficult decision without much in the way of moral commentary. And when people I knew said, gambling is wrong, what they really meant was that someone was being foolish with money. Which brought me to a final question. Is card counting even gambling? In the years that followed my analysis of the issues, and a gazillion plus conversations with people about card counting, my religious partners and I learned to refine our understanding of gambling and investing. It turns out that true card counting fits much better under the definition of the latter. If you want to make a profit at blackjack like an investor does in any other gamma stocks, bonds, real estate, small business, etc. It's imperative that you think like an investor at the tables and not like a gambler. So let's dig into the differences between gambling and investing. Gambling versus investing. As described earlier, many of the things that people can invest in, they can also gamble at. So what makes something a gamble and what makes it an investment? I would argue that there are three common characteristics of gambling. 1. It's not based in logic. 2. The odds are against you, so in the long run, you'll lose money. And 3. It's primarily a vehicle for entertainment. Let's take a more detailed look at these three aspects of gambling. It's not based in logic. When people gamble, their play isn't based on logic or math, but on hunches, superstitions, random occurrences, luck, etc. And yes, a lot of gamblers have systems and they'll defend their decisions until they're blue in the face. But can the system, or their decisions, be backed up with logic? Mathematics. Can you run a computer simulation of the end result of their decision making? If not with computer simulations, does the gambler have a large enough sample size to prove a track record? In every case, the answer is number. The odds are against you, so in the long run, you'll lose money. For recreational players, when gambling, the odds almost always favor the house, or the person whose proposition you're gambling on. Even if you don't know that the odds are against you or you believe, hope and pray, your system will work. The reality is that if the odds are against you, you're gambling. No matter what the motivations, intentions, or beliefs, a gambler is always trying to defy the odds. The best example of this is the lottery. The expected return on the typical $2 lottery ticket is 32 cents. That means the lottery has an 84% advantage over the $2 gambler. Yet every year, Americans spend more than $70 billion on lottery tickets, losing $59 billion along the way. Why waste 84 cents of every dollar for the hope of being the one who defies the odds and becomes rich? Someone has to win a lottery jackpot, but you're gambling against monumentally long odds when you try. Gamblers love to talk about their wins, but if you were to get an honest look at their records after hundreds of hours, you'd inevitably see a lot of red ink. That's why many jokingly refer to Las Vegas as lost wages. Given enough time, gamblers are guaranteed to end up paying dearly for their beliefs, systems, hopes, and dreams, which all adds up to bar entertainment. It's primarily used for entertainment. Why would someone either knowingly or unknowingly gamble with hard-earned money? What motivates tens of millions of Americans to gamble each year? Simply stated, it serves as a form of entertainment. Casinos in the U.S. make $70 billion year after year because they provide, at best, short-term entertainment and, at worst, an addictive escape from reality. I'm not going to argue whether people should or should not gamble for entertainment, though it's my opinion that gambling is a very high-risk low-reward form of it. But what I will say is that what people should be willing to do is be honest with themselves. If you're playing a game of chance with the odds stacked against you, you are gambling. Investing is inherently the Idiasis negation rent. With investing, the system can be proven with either sound, logic or mathematics. And when implemented properly, the investor is using the odds to his or her advantage. Furthermore, while at times using a winning system for profit can be incredibly fun, entertainment isn't the investor's goal. Long-term profits are. And like Christian Bale's character in The Big Short, If you give that investor enough time, the math is guaranteed to work out in his favor. So what about card counting? In card counting, both the risk and reward can be calculated with mathematical precision. By calculating your long-term risk, you can manage it. For example, while running the church team, we kept our risk of ruin, the chance of losing the entire bankroll, at a maximum 0.1%, thus making it an incredibly low-risk investment. And by calculating the value of the games you play, you can have a good idea of your return on investment. When I was playing blackjack full-time, I looked for games with an expectation of $200 $400 per hour. Since I went pro, my overall hourly win rate has been $432. Finally, anyone who's lived the life of a professional blackjack player knows that entertainment isn't the goal. Sure, it can be thrilling, but it can also be exhausting, monotonous, frustrating, highly stressful, and an emotional roller coaster unlike anything else you'll ever experience. But card counters weather the storm, because they're disciplined investors with their eye on the inevitable prize, long-term profits. Hopefully, at this point it's clear that a card counter thinks like an investor at the tables, not like a gambler. But that doesn't mean it's as easy as that. On the contrary, all sorts of misconceptions, faulty logic, and subconscious factors at play can cause the most well-intentioned card counter to start thinking like a gambler. In the following section, we dive deeply into the faulty logic beneath the gambler's mentality, which I found to be the most pervasive tragedy found in casinos. Gambler's fallacies. Apophenia. Come on, I don't need to hear about apos and phonias. Teach me how to make the money. Tell me stories of big wins, backups, and team play. Don't worry, blackjack Bedouins and current APs. I'll get there. But I have to spend a few pages talking about how people fall for gambling mindsets. My goal is to make investors. Investing in my blackjack business took me from $2,000 to more than $600,000 in a few short years, and the investor mindset has resulted in millions in profits for people I've trained through blackjack apprenticeship. If it's our hope to walk into casinos as investors and not as gamblers, we need to understand the other side. How does a gambler think? What false beliefs might we ourselves have that will interfere with our ability to behave more like an investor? Casinos ravage their local communities, offering false hope to their victims and often preying on the most vulnerable. However, not just the poor and downcast fall victim to the bright lights and promises of quick riches. Gambling casualties come in all forms. But why do so many people think they'll defy the odds? Do people's minds shut off when they walk through the rows of chirping slot machines? Ironically, it's the opposite. Our own minds often deceive us. Imagine this scenario. You walk up to a roulette table and see on the digital display that the ball has landed on black the past 20 spins in a row. Now you ask a dozen gamblers what you should bet on. They're likely to fall into two categories. One group shouts, "Bet black, black is hot." The other group yells, "Bet red, red is due." In reality, both of those groups are wrong. Every spin of the roulette wheel is an independent event, and independent events have no impact on future events. Why do you think casinos install those digital display boards, tracking which numbers and colors have hit most recently? Are they trying to help you accurately predict the future pattern? Hardly. They know there's no predictable pattern at the roulette table, or the baccarat table, crap table, or slot machine. Here's where apophenia comes in. Apophenia is the term neurologists use to define the reality that humans are universally looking for patterns in random information. Various theories attempt to explain why people often attribute the wrong conclusions to information, but no one debates the fact that apophenia happens all over the place and is on full display in casinos. The most common form of apophenia is known as the gambler's fallacy, where gamblers believe they've discovered patterns from random bits of information. If you've sat at blackjack tables for any amount of time, I guarantee you've heard many bold claims by the players, dealer, and likely even your own deceitful mind, all falsely based on the gambler's fallacy. One of the most common is believing that the other players at the table have an impact on whether you win or lose. This false belief comes in many forms. It's a team sport. You need a strong anchor at third base. He just took the dealer's bus card. It doesn't matter where in the world you play this game. There's a universal belief among gamblers that the game can be beaten with a solid cast of players, a broken bar and a cooperative dealer. But that one player who isn't performing as well as you is the reason you've been losing. You have to come up with a new excuse if you happen to be playing alone. The fact is that the other players at the table have no impact on your odds. Another player is just as likely to make a decision that helps you win a hand as lose it. You can play with the world's greatest card counter or an orangutan and your odds won't change one bit. If you don't believe me, here's a computer simulation, using CV Data Advanced Blackjack software, to show the outcome of a basic strategy player after 100 million hours of play at a table with an average blackjack player, a horrible player, and a perfect basic strategy player. Simply put, Believing other players affect your outcome is apophenia. Another example of this mental condition is thinking you're more likely to win or lose based on the past hand or 100 hands or 1000 hands. Nearly every betting strategy is based on this fallacy. If you lost the last hand, you bet more, less this hand, because you're due to win, lose. The classic example is the coin flip. Everyone knows that a coin flip is a 50-50 proposition, with a fair coin. But if you flip a coin 10 times, you could get any random result. 10 heads and 0 tails, 3 heads and 7 tails, or 1 heads and 9 tails. Here's where apophenia sneaks in. Since we know that the odds state that the most likely outcome is 5 heads and 5 tails, we have a tendency to think the math should work out immediately. So, if after 9 flips the results are 5 heads and 4 tails, people tend to believe the next flip is more likely to be tails. But the reality is that the coin doesn't know or care about the results of the last 9 flips. No coin god is watching over the experiment to make sure the odds work out in the short term. Even if you flip heads 1000 times in a row, the next flip of a fair coin is just as likely to be heads as tails, because every flip of the coin is an independent event. Then what's the point of the odds if it's all random? Well, the more you flip that coin, the more likely the law of large numbers will work out and you'll approach 50-50 percentage-wise. This isn't because you're more likely to flip one or the other based on past events, but because as the sample size increases, the odds move closer to a half-and-half result, as a percentage. Casinos know this. That's why they aren't concerned if a gambler wins on any given night. You'd be surprised how many people tell me that they think the casino is cheating them. The casino doesn't have to. Casinos know the odds will work out in their favor after enough time. You had a winning night? They'll offer you a hotel room, meals, or tickets to the heavyweight championship fight to keep you coming back. None of that is from benevolence. Rather, it's because they know that if you play long enough, their advantage over you will eventually catch up and they'll end up with your money. Unless, that is, you have the advantage over them. One more point about the simulation. It's also instructive to observe the huge effect that employing better strategies has on your monetary results. The simulation assumes 100 hands per hour with just a $10 flat bet, yet the reward for improving from a poor player to an average player is more than $31 per hour and money saved, and the per hour loss is halved again by learning basic strategy, which is discussed at length in Chapter 3. Predicting streaks. Luck. I know the flow of the cards. Variations on this theme include: I just can't beat that dealer, she always pulls 20s and 21s. I can't leave right now, a broken bar, I'm on a heater. I've been getting killed. I'm due for a winning shoe. There is no flow to the cards. Well, there is, but not one that can be predicted. The flow is just the variance, or randomness, of the game. All casino games involve a large degree of variance. If the games didn't have variance, gamblers would all walk out losers, or winners, every day. But the games are designed so that there's a high degree of volatility, resulting in any possible outcome in the short term, even though the casinos know exactly what you're worth to them in the long term. All that variance results in gamblers thinking they can predict the short term, apophenia. But again, since casino games are based on independent events, you can't look at the past to determine the future. So if you're saying that you can't predict the future, what's the point of card counting? Thanks for asking. You know everything I said about all casino games being based on independent events? Well, there's a glitch in the matrix. Blackjack is dealt from a deck, or typically a bunch of decks, and casinos don't shuffle those decks after every hand. Thus, blackjack actually involves dependent events. If a queen of diamonds leaves a single deck of cards, that queen of diamonds will not be dealt again until the dealer shuffles. In 1956, 4 math-oriented soldiers testing weapons systems at the Army's Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland got interested in blackjack. Using a mechanical calculator, the 4 men, who later became known as the 4 Horsemen of Aberdeen, spent 18 months developing a basic strategy for the game. Using the 4 Horsemen's concepts, Ed Thorpe, considered the father of card counting, discovered that the odds of the game change based on the cards that have already been dealt. If an ace or a 10 value card is removed from the deck, or shoe, the odds of the game have shifted more to the casino side. But if a small value card, like a 5, is removed from the deck, the odds have shifted toward the player. It doesn't mean a card counter will win the next hand, but a seasoned card counter knows when the odds have shifted in his or her favor. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Here's my point about apophenia. Everyone in a casino is looking for an explanation for why they're losing, and it surely can't be the most obvious. They're playing a game with the odds stacked against them, so they simply cannot beat the game over a long period of time. But we card counters are part of the 0.1% of the population that ignores the independent events, superstitions, and logical fallacies on which casinos are built. We actually pay attention to the odds and the math behind the games and use that information to invest at the tables by working with the odds, not against them. Gamblers versus investors at the blackjack tables. The more you understand the distinction between how a gambler thinks and how an investor thinks, the more you can see how these different mentalities play out at the blackjack tables. Here are a few of my favorite differences between how a gambler and a card counter approach blackjack. Other players at the table. The gambler. I've already explained how gamblers view other players at the table. If another player makes a single mistake, he or she is the bane of the whole table. According to gamblers, blackjack is a team sport and it's up to the entire table not to ruin the flow of the cards. The card counter. The card counter, on the other hand, understands that in the long run, the other players have no bearing on his or her ability to win or lose at the game. But that doesn't mean the other players have no impact. On the contrary, other players have a huge impact on a card counter's win rate. How? They slow down the game. This decreases the number of hands you're able to play per hour, thus limiting your win rate. When to leave the gambler. Many gamblers attempt to defy the odds by employing a walk-away willy or ahead strategy. The thought is that most people lose money at the casinos because they stick around too long. If, however, you have the discipline to leave when you're up, you end up a winning gambler. The problem is that the gambler doesn't understand that walking away at some random point when ahead doesn't in any way affect future outcomes, and results are cumulative. Your entire career, gambling or investing, at the blackjack tables is much more like one endless session with ups and downs. So unless you walk while ahead and never play again, this strategy has no merit. The two graphs on the following page compare 2,000 hours of losing play with 2,000 hours of professional level card counting. If you're gambling at the blackjack tables, the one thing that's guaranteed is that you'll have a downward trajectory over your lifetime, and no amount of discipline or leaving at the right time will change the fact that the casino will end up with your money. You simply cannot outsmart the odds. 2,000 hours of simulated results of an average blackjack player. Simulation by Cartwright. 2,000 actual hours of play by Joe, a professional card counter. The card counter. The card counter also needs to decide when to leave the tables, but it's a much simpler decision. You leave when you're done investing for the day. Maybe you're tired, hungry, have plans, want to avoid too much attention from the casino, the game conditions deteriorate, or you simply call it quits until tomorrow. Since you know that every hour at the tables plays into one endless session, which changes dates and locations, you simply leave when you feel like it. There's no difference in the odds today or tomorrow, so you play when you want to invest and stop playing after you're done. I once played a session where I simply could not lose. I didn't pay attention to the value of the chips I stuffed into my pockets. I just kept playing. I wanted to get more hours in and I was waiting for my wife to meet me at the casino for a comp dinner. When she arrived, I was in the middle of another hot shoe. The dealer, pit boss, and other gamblers were all begging my wife to make me walk away from the table before I lost my money back. But I knew that I was still making a good investment, so I kept playing until the end of the shoe. When I finally added up my money, I was up $23,000, having added 35% to our team's profits in one day. That session became a bit of local legend among card counters. I won nearly 100 units in a single day, and rather than stopping, I kept playing until I no longer felt like it. I was simply thinking like an investor and would have done the same thing if I'd been losing. Speaking of losing, you can't and won't win every day no matter how hard you try. Any professional card counter will tell you that if you play long enough, you'll encounter a losing streak more than 100 hours long. Trying to overcome those losing streaks in the short term will just burn you out. But you will overcome them in time. If you trust the math, it makes no difference if you happen to be up for the day or down for the month. You'll end up ahead in due time. Card counters aren't interested in short-term results or Pyrrhic victories, but in being disciplined investors who continue to play with the odds on their side, waiting patiently for the math to work out in their favor. Determining if you're a winning player. The gambler. How does average Joe gambler determine if he's a winning player? Simple. If he just won, he's a winner. I almost always win when I go to the casino. Conveniently, gamblers have very selective memories. They tend to discard from their memories the times that they lost, always bragging about that time they made the big score at the casino. The problem is that short-term results have no bearing on whether you'll be a long-term winner. If that were the case, casinos would kick out anyone who has a lucky night. Instead, they do the opposite. They try to lavish the lucky winners with free food, a room, show tickets, or whatever it takes to get them to keep coming back. Casinos know the truth, that gamblers are long-term losers who happen to win once in a while. The joke among pit personnel is, we're just lending him the money. He'll pay it back soon enough. Casinos are actually thinking like investors, knowing that the math will work out in their favor if they can keep gamblers returning to try to defy the odds. The card counter. Card counters know that you can't decide anyone is a winning player by looking at isolated results. The only true way to recognize a winning player is by witnessing the implementation of perfect playing decisions, perfect card counting, and perfect betting. Anything less than perfect play at each phase of the game won't cut it, no matter what any short-term results indicate. Ironically, I can pinpoint winning players by dealing to them for less than 30 minutes, and it has nothing to do with if they're up or down at the end. I can run players through enough difficult decisions in less than a half hour to determine whether they can play perfectly or not. If they can't, they won't be long-term winners at the casino. If they can make it through my test out, I know they have the skills needed to gain the edge over the casino, or what we card counters call generate positive expected value, or EV for short. What is EV? One of the most memorable parts of running the church team was our quarterly team meetings. We spent an entire weekend hanging out, enjoying one another's company, celebrating recent successes or lamenting recent losses, retesting our players' skills, and providing new training materials and practices. One of the events during a team meeting was the awards ceremony. Here were a few of the awards we gave out. A-Sense winningest player, $500 to the player who won the most over the past 3 months. A-Sense losingest player, $500 to the player who lost the most over the past 3 months. A-Sense most EV, $1,000 to the player who generated the most EV over the past 3 months. Why did we give awards for biggest winner and loser? And why did we give the biggest award to the player who generated the most expected value? Even though variance plays a big part in the first 2 awards, we believed all 3 are correlated with the generation of positive EV. EV is the single most important concept to a card counter or advantage player, and we knew that if we inspired or incentivized players to focus their efforts on that, everything else would fall into place. So what exactly is EV? EV is short for expected value, which is the amount you expect to win over a given time period, based on the pure math of your playing decisions and the variables of the game that don't change. EV is rarely the amount that you will actually win or lose, it's the mathematical value of your playing decisions. Remember the lottery ticket example? If you buy a $2 lottery ticket, you'll most likely lose $2, but you might get lucky and win $5 or $10, or get really lucky and win a significant amount of money. But the mathematical expectation, aka expected value, of buying a lottery ticket is $1.68. And while it's impossible to lose exactly $1.68 from buying a single lottery ticket, the more lottery tickets you buy, the more likely the value of all your lottery tickets will be a $1.68 each. An even simpler example is our old friend the coin flip. If you flip a coin, the EV of either heads or tails is 0.5, or a 1/2, or 50%. Of course, every time you flip a coin, there's a 50-50 chance that it will land on heads or tails. As I've explained before, the previous results don't impact the fact that every flip of the coin is exactly a PKM, or even, proposition. It's statistically impossible to get 50% heads on a single flip. But the more times you flip a coin and the larger the sample size, the more likely you are to approach EV, or 50% heads and 50% tails. Card counters make all their decisions based on EV. We know the EV of a game we'll be playing before we set foot in the casino. We base our bets not on whether we're winning or losing, the dealer is hot or cold, we're wearing our lucky underwear, or have a gut feeling, but simply on the EV of the hand and our bankroll size. A card counter might be playing a game with an EV of $200 per hour. However, he won't walk out of the casino after an hour with an extra $200. He might walk out down $4,000. Up $6,500, or anywhere in between, because of variance. But his decisions will be based on knowing that if he continues to play perfectly at a $200 per hour EV game, the swings will eventually average out and the pure math of the game will work out, leaving him with the expectation of a $200 per hour long-term profit. This brings me back to the cash awards we gave to our players. If you're a perfect card counter and you generate lots of EV, you will have big losses at times. While a gambler might, or even should, be reprimanded for a large loss, we knew it was okay to provide positive reinforcement to card counters with big losses, because in spite of the short-term negative outcomes, if their decisions were perfect, they were contributing to the long-run win by generating positive EV. When we gave the award for the biggest winner during a quarter, we talked not about that player's luck or even skill, but that he was out there generating EV. While other players might be afraid to bet so boldly, we wanted to celebrate those players who fearlessly played high EV sessions. And the biggest prize, the $1,000 for the player who generated the most EV, had nothing to do with actual results, but was simply our mathematical calculation of the player who generated the most. Whether that player was in the positive or negative for the quarter, we didn't care. We only cared about the level of EV. Results follow math. At the end of the day, you want to celebrate the math, not the results. For this reason, we informed our players that if they won $100,000 in a night, but made a playing mistake, we wouldn't be happy. Mistakes cost you positive EV. On the flip side, if players lost $100,000, but played perfectly, we commended them. They perfectly generated positive EV. At our team meetings, we always played some sort of game, just for fun. We played poker, a made-up game called Spanish 31, yeah, 31, and the card counting Olympics, to name a few. But at one of our earliest team meetings, we played real money Monopoly. Ben and a friend stayed up late the night before changing all the Monopoly board properties to casinos. They also came up with cash amounts for playing decisions. For example, you didn't get $200 in Monopoly money for passing go. You got $5 in real money. The game had a 30-minute time limit, at which point the players kept whatever amount of money they had collected. Because of the size of the team, we had two games going on at two adjacent tables. Ben was running one table and I was running the other. I was the banker, collecting and passing out cash as the players took their turns and made their decisions. After about 10 minutes of typical Monopoly play, one of our best players, Loudon, said, "Hey, if we refuse to buy properties and instead agree to just roll as fast as we can to pass go from one person to the next, we'll make a lot more money." Because our players thought in terms of EV, they instantly got it. The most EV came from passing go, so the best way to generate it was to simply roll the dice as fast as possible, player after player, until the time ran out. My eyes were as big as saucers as I handed out $5 bill after $5 bill. But I also had a giant smile on my face. They'd figured out a way to generate the most positive EV. Real money Monopoly. A real-life example of thinking in terms of EV is three-point shooting in the NBA. Over the past 20 years, three-point attempts have increased from fewer than 5 to a staggering 27 attempts per game. Why? Because teams are thinking in terms of the EV of a three-point shot relative to the EV of a two-point shot. The league average for two-point shooting is roughly 50%, meaning that every shot is worth about 1 point. Since a three-point shot is worth, well, 3 points, you would need to be averaging only 33.3% from the three-point line to generate the equivalent EV. But the league average for three-point shooting is actually 36%. So every three-point shot is worth nearly 1.1 points. And for a top three-point shooter like Steph Curry, with a career 436% make rate, each shot is worth over 1.3 points. A valuable three-point shooter results in roughly 5 extra points per game. Yeah, the difference between being the number 1 team and the number 12 team. If you happen to have a player like Steph Curry, who has a career three-point percentage of 43.5%, every shot is worth 1.3 points, a 30% increase in EV over a two-point shot. Teams with several accurate three-point shooters can mean the difference between the best and worst records in the NBA. I'm not claiming that all you need to do to win an NBA championship is take more three-pointers. But you can see how thinking in terms of EV can have a huge impact on a game. And fortunately for us, Blackjack has few variables, making our decisions far easier. All we need to determine EV as card counters is perfect play, knowledge of the value of our card counting system and betting, and a quantification of the value of the game we're playing. Rules, number of decks, deck penetration, and rounds per hour. But before we can worry about determining our EV, first we have to master the game. Career to professional card counter. Spartan, what were you doing before becoming a card counter? I was an engineer designing automotive wire harness shields for a year. How did you get into card counting? I saw Holy Rollers on Net9, geared I could do it. And the rest is history. What was your training like? A mix of software training and physically dealing cards to myself. I got a buddy involved, so it was easier to train. I played a lot of blackjack at home. Did you quit your job right away, or what did that transition look like? I started training in April 2015. I was ready to play by June, but didn't start professionally until that September. By June 2016, I'd grown my bankroll to $30,000 and teamed up with BJA member Levi Mitch. Working with him was one of the greatest decisions of my career, although it was a bumpy beginning. We were on a continuous losing streak from June to September 2016. Those were uncertain times, but I never felt more alive. When I got back home from my RST long trip, I moved out of my apartment and traveled the country playing blackjack for the next 3 months before finally settling in Las Vegas. Following are some pictures from that epic 8,000-mile road trip. The circles on the map are places we stayed. The balloons are casinos with playable games. Do you miss your old job? Not in the slightest. Any life lessons you've learned from card counting? Patience and perseverance. Knowing when to attack with aggression and when to pull back in defense. Seeing things in the big picture and maintaining consistency toward that goal. Oh, and if you're trying to avoid in your life, money won't solve that. Blackjack will give you two things: money and interesting stories to tell. I'd urge you to figure out what your end game is and use blackjack as a vehicle to guide you to that goal. What's your favorite thing about being a card counter and AP? Being in control of my time and money. I'll always remain thankful for the life I've created for myself. Years from now, when all this is behind me, if anyone ever asks why I became a card counter, I'll put on my best Walter White, of Breaking Bad fame, impersonation and say, I did it for me. I liked it. I was good at it and I was really alive.